let's go right to the beginning. Do
Sure.
you think you could tell us about how you got into this style of music, synthesizers, and what your earliest pieces were on your musical journey?
Well, I mean, it was like everyone, I sort of got into music. I come from a musical family. Everyone in the family plays something. My mum, my dad, brothers, they all play instruments. I was the first one really to get into kind of electronic kind of sounds. I think that was probably through other media, especially growing up in the, late 70s and 80s. It was, well, the 80s more than anything. You had, lots of electronic music in movies and TV, even like kids shows at school. There'd be, they couldn't afford an orchestra, so they'd get some guy with synthesizers and they'd make this soundtrack to it. And it was always like, oh, what's that? Didn't know what synth was, but I suppose that all changed really when I first heard Gary Newman on Top of the Pops, which is like a UK, well, it was a UK weekly show, which everybody watched, and it was always the latest sort of hits. And, at that kind of time, it was Top of the Pops was very much, we had sort of the end of punk music, and you get like duets and all this sort of stuff, and all of a sudden there's this guy who looks like a robot singing like a robot with all this electronic music, and it was like, wow, that's amazing. That's what I want to kind of get into. So that was sort of earliest memories of synthesizers, really. I guess for me personally, getting into music, that came, I guess, from, well, as a younger kid. Not that you look at me now, but as a younger kid, I was well into the whole breakdancing scene. I was in a crew. There was about 14 of us. Used to go around do shows, but also the usual battles with other crews, doing all sort of all these things. And I loved a lot of people in the sort of early 80s. They loved all the kind of electro pop, Depeche Mode and all that type of thing. And apart from, say, Gary Newman, like I mentioned, I was really into like early kind of hip hop and electro music, because it was like using all these sounds, all these synth sounds, but with a lot of funk as well, like Africa Bambaataa, and there was a lot of Grandmaster Flash and all that sort of stuff. So that was the kind of music I was really into. And then I got into DJing. I was probably about 16, 17. There's myself and a couple of other guys. We all bought a record deck each, and we all got together. We'd share the gear every couple of weeks, and it was into like mixing and scratching and all that sort of stuff. But around that sort of time, it was probably about 87. That's when house music just exploded out of pretty much nowhere, really. It kind of seemed to me more from electro, and then this elements of disco bringing into this electronic music, and then there we are. It was house music was kind of born, and that really, stood out to me. That was my music for, and that's what I wanted to get involved with. So, yeah, used to DJ in a like a fun pub, if you like, in where I'm from, which is Coventry in the UK, and I just got interested then into, I want to make some of this stuff. So I had a pair of decks at home. And then I got like this little Casio sampler, this little cheap SK1 sampler, and a Casio RZ1 drum machine. And then from there, I was able to sample a bass line and use grid paper and figure out what the actual, track was. So I went on a music course. Well, it was a studio course in Birmingham, UK, which was run by guys called The Commission. They used to do remixes for, there was this LP that used to come out every month called Disco Mix Club. It was like an industry type of, it had like remixes and new releases on. So I went over there, and as soon as I walked in the studio, it was like, I'm at home. I knew this was what I wanted to kind of do, really. So yeah, my early stuff was house music. I was awful at it. In fact, I dug it out not long ago and put it up on SoundCloud. The first ever track I did, it was, I knew nothing. I couldn't play a note, and not a lot has changed, really, but I couldn't play a note. It was just sampling. It was like like we all did back in the day. But yeah, I fell in love with it then. So that's pretty much how it all kind of started, really.
I like that origin story. It's really cool.
Yeah. Well, we've all got them, haven't we? So, but yeah, it was good fun times, and it's just as well, really, because it's stuck with me ever since, and ever since, ever since. To a point now where it's what I do for a living. Where back then it was all like it was fun. It was, but well, it was more than fun. It was my kind of identity, really. I'm a DJ. I'm into scratch mixing. Constantly thinking about it and obsessed, really, to a degree. But back then it was a little bit different. It wasn't just I'm into techno and that's the thing. You could play house music, you could play hip hop and rap, and you could play lots of different styles of music within one sort of set, if you like. It's not so divided. I think back then all there was the Chicago house, Detroit techno, and then my favorite, which was the kind of New York scene, which was like Todd Terry and that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was all fun times, definitely.
Nice. No love for acid?
Well, acid came, actually. I remember I was DJing down at this place, Tally Ho it was. And in the morning, what I used to do on a Saturday, I used to go on the train. Here's me, like 17-year-old. Go on the train, spend all my wages that I earned during the week on vinyl. And it was all imports, and it was all like US imports, if anything. And then I'd be there at 8 o'clock in the morning, waiting for the guy to turn up and open his store. So I'd get the records to then get back, and then we'd start at it was about sort of 1 p.m. in the afternoon, and then we had sort of guest DJs. I mean, I wasn't like a resident there, and I was too young. But the guy that was allowed us to come down, and he just got paid, and we did all the work. So, but we loved it. You know what I mean? Hearing all this music really loud, and then mixing and scratching and all that sort of stuff. But I remember this resident DJ. This DJ turned up and said, "Oh, can I have a go?" And he came up, played 4 records, and it was acid, and that was where it all started to seep in. And acid really took over, and well, the whole sort of culture around it sort of blew up, really. It pulled in lots of people who weren't necessarily into the kind of music, but they were into the partying and the whole, because it was quite unique to the UK with this whole sort of illegal parties and everything like that, which, yeah, I went to, but end of the day, it was still the sort of music element that I was more into. But yeah, it was fun times, definitely.
It's really nice. It's nice to hear you talk about that, because I've seen on TV, or I've heard from my parents who like I'm a club rat. They were club rats. They would tell me about stories of what the 80s and the 90s was like for music, and just DJ culture, how interesting it was, because it was not that it was like new, but it was entering like that stage of what we know it to be today. So I really like hearing people who are still involved with music today, but they started back then, because it's just amazing to see that evolution over time, especially amongst genres that lead to what we have today. Like, you can hear an acid line in pop, or you can hear like trance, like stabs, or you can hear like any other sort of like signature sound from those different dance music genres today amongst any other genre. So it's just incredible to see how far things have come.
Yeah, no, definitely. It was a totally brand new sound that I kind of started seeing it change in like 86, 87. That's when it started to change in the kind of underground scene, if you like. In the pops, in the charts, it was still the usual, pop, bubblegum pop, and I love you and he loves me and that sort of stuff, and then we started to sort of, probably towards the end of the 80s, start to hear it cross over into the charts. I think there was Mars with Pump Up the Volume. I think that was probably one of the first ones, actually. And that was, sort of getting in the charts with music with no vocals on, no singing. It was just little samples dropped here, there, and everywhere, and a bit of scratching. And those things were kind of fairly sort of new. you know, because you'd have that play on top of the pops. The next track would be a ballad singing about I love you and all that. It was like so contrast. And then, yeah, it kind of the culture, I suppose, pushed it forward. You know, there was this whole dance scene around it, the whole party scene around it all. It wasn't just a style of music. So, but while some people were going into that party side of things, I was more interested in how is this stuff made? How do you do it? And, you know, it was a fascination. I love these sounds. And at first I was just tinkering with this little sampler, where you got like probably half a second of sample time, and it was the worst quality, but you could sample this sound and then make your own melody from this sound that was just on this record. And it just spurred off creative ideas, especially when, you know, when you are sort of DJing the scratch mix thing. Back then it was use a 4-track and then you drop a drum loop and then stick a vocal off another thing, and you'd create like a mix tape, if you like. So it seemed like a natural progression. The only thing is there wasn't a lot of people around who were doing it really. So you're pretty much in isolation. But yeah, it was all good fun, and it just seemed like the natural thing to do.